and welcome to episode 19 of Bibliophile series. This series we go through articles and we read through them, understand whatever is mentioned there to the best of my ability. Whatever I understand, I pass it on, and then people and then you watch it. Okay. So this week, the article has been taken from Indian Express editorial desk, and it is about growing proximity. It is about growing relations between Russia and China, and how India is sort of having potential downfalls for it down the way. Okay, so let's read through whatever is mentioned. The 43rd meeting between the Russian President Vladimir Putin and Chinese leader Xi Jinping last week in Beijing underlines the growing anti-Western convergence of strategic interests between two of the world's longest-serving leaders. Now, Russia and China have, as in the context of this article, the outside understanding, the West has always touted its superiority. In fact, West always believes they are the economically better entity. They have more advanced markets. Their way of operation is better. Their freedom is better. This, that, everything. They have this superiority idea embedded that whatever they do is the best thing. And Russia and China, despite being behemoths in their own right, have never fully gained acceptance in the West. And this has always been a point of contention for Russia and China. So the fact that anti-Western convergence, China is opposed to the Western idea of superiority, Russia is opposed to the Western idea of superiority. So Russia and China coming together seems like a very logical thing to do because enemy of my enemy is my friend. That idea is getting high. The expansive agenda outlined by the two leaders demands that Delhi carefully recalibrates its own great power relations and compensates wherever necessary to blunt the negative consequences of the Sino-Russian entente. I don't know the correct pronunciation of this word, but I'm guessing Sino-Russian relationship. I will read it as Sino-Russian relationship. Now, Sino is a word that is used of or relating to China. So, China-Russian relationship that is being talked of. Now, the expansive agenda outlined by the two leaders being Putin and Jinping, demands that Delhi, a lot of times countries, instead of mentioning the names of the country, we get away with mentioning the capitals of the country. So sometimes when we say, let's say the interests of US are not being served, the Washington is not happy with how the things are turning out. To mention it that way, London is not happy with the way that things are turning out. So this writing style or this write-up, when it says Delhi, doesn't really mean the location Delhi. It means the capital of the country India or the country India in totality needs to carefully recalibrate its own great power relations. It needs to adjust the relationships that it has with great powers. It could very well be in reference to Russia and China. It could be very well in reference to Western countries, Western economies. But whatever relationships it needs to readjust because these two powerhouses are coming together. And India needs to compensate wherever necessary to blunt the potential negative consequences. It doesn't say potential, but I'm saying potential negative consequences because so far there hasn't been anything negative that has already been identified. But potential negative consequences that can emerge, India needs to counter that, needs to blunt that by adjusting its own relationships with the other nations of this world. Since he took charge of Russia in 2000, Putin has made a sustained effort to boost ties with China, even as he explored a modus vivendi with the West. Okay, modus vivendi. I don't know what modus vivendi is. From this statement, what I can understand is, ever since Putin has come into power, he's tried to become friends with China or improve relations with China. Even as he explored modus vivendi with West, I don't know what modus vivendi is, but it could be one of two things. Even as he explored, or even as he tried to improve relations there, or took an antagonistic stance to the West. One of these two versions will work for modus vivendi. Now, when I'm reading an article, I don't understand this. This is the time I go to Google, I look up the meaning of this word, I understand and move on. But let's say I was reading this in an exam, I would work it out as there are two versions or two possible interpretations. One, perhaps trying to befriend the West, or taking an antagonistic stance to the Western policies, the Western states. Okay, let's see. At the turn of 2000s, a rising China was celebrating its special ties to the United States and Europe, but found it useful to develop strong ties with Russia. So first sentence was from the perspective of Russia. Second statement is from the perspective of China. So at the turn of the century, China already had good relations with US and the West, but it also felt it would be in its interest to hedge its bets and also have good relations with Russia. Since his ascent to the top in Beijing, Xi Jinping has challenged the US primacy in Asia and doubled down on a strong partnership with Russia. Basically, they are maintaining good relationship with West also and maintaining good relationships with Russia also. Diplomatically, that is the best state to be in, wherein if there are two opposing parties, you end up having cordial relations with both of them. Right? As their contradictions with US began to deepen over the last decade. The there here refers to China. As their contradictions, China's contradictions with the US began to deepen over the last decade. Both Putin and Xi have elevated their bilateral collaboration into a comprehensive strategic partnership. So the degree of coordination, the degree of assistance that Russia and China previously had, it was at a lower scale, and now it has turned into something of a higher scale. They have elevated their bilateral collaboration into a comprehensive strategic partnership. Okay. On the eve of his invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, Putin traveled to Beijing to proclaim an alliance without limits. Now, this statement is sort of an example for what was mentioned earlier. Their degree of alliance, their degree of dependence on each other has been rising. They have gotten into a comprehensive strategic partnership. And an example of that is given one day prior, on the eve of his invasion of Ukraine, one day prior to that, he went to China and made the public statement. When you proclaim, you make a public statement. An alliance without limits. That is, we will support each other no matter what. In the sense that, let's say if you have a best friend, regardless of whether they are right or wrong on a particular issue, you are always going to have their back. That is the sort of relationship Putin is talking about when it comes to Beijing. Or in more formal terms, Beijing and Russia will unconditionally support each other on all issues. Okay. Since then, Putin and Xi have surprised the Western observers who had been arguing that Russia and China can't get too close to each other given the range of their competing regional geopolitical interests and the intensity of their stakes in economic engagement with the West. Okay. Since then, Putin and Xi has surprised the Western observers. So Western observers held the view that Putin and Xi, Russia and China, will not necessarily become great allies because they have competing geopolitical interests. They have contradictory. Russia also wants supremacy in the Asian region. China also wants supremacy. When we say supremacy, it could be military, it could be economic, all sorts of things. At the same time, because they are so dependent upon their economic ties with the West, if they became too pally with each other, if they became too dependent on each other, it would not be to their interest because the West can perhaps retaliate. The West can do economic damage to them. Let's say in the days gone by, when you had a problem with a country, you had a war with it. In the modern day and age, at least from the Western perspective, you don't engage with war with them directly, you engage in economic warfare. At least as long as the opponent is formidable, you engage in economic warfare. If it is not a formidable opponent, the military industrial complex will force you to go have a actual war with them. You have unending wars happening in US for the last 20 plus years, ever since 9/11. US has always been in a state of war. Forget all the peace and prosperity and those that they've had, but they have always been in constant conflict. They've been utilizing that to their advantage. All the military industrial complex participants, the corporations that provide military equipment, charge the military, let's say 5x or 6x times the actual price, they are making bank. Anyway, that is external concept. The idea here is the Western observers did not expect Russia and China to have closer relationships being developed. Yet, that has happened. The reasons for expecting that closer relationships would not develop is contradictory geopolitical interests and the fact that they are too reliant on their economic well-being in their relationships with the West. Okay. Yet Putin and Xi have shown that they can put their divergences aside in building a new axis rooted in their shared interest in challenging the West. Okay. So West expected because they have both of them have similar goals in regional dominance. They would not align with each other. They would not be allies of each other. But both Russia and China have shown they are willing to forego this target in order to compete with the West, in order to challenge the West. The latest summit has highlighted their efforts at political coordination and mutual support on their respective national priorities. Ukraine for Russia and Taiwan for China. Russia believes Ukraine was the part of their motherland and Ukraine should be added. There are underlying tones for why resources and this and that, but then at least the public reason given is Ukraine was supposed to be a part of Russia. It was, and that is where most Ukrainians want to be in. That. Similarly, China believes Taiwan should be a part of China, although the international community does not agree with this idea. A lot of them also recognize Taiwan. Then China has this expansionist ambition of including Taiwan within its border, and Russia has the expansionist aspiration of including Ukraine within its borders. So, that said, they have similar goals when it comes to these specific issues, their respective national priorities, and they are working together in order to advance the cause. Putin and Xi also denounced US interventions in Europe and its effort to build new coalitions like the Quadrilateral Forum, in which India is a member along with Australia, Japan, and the US. Okay. So, while they have their own expansionist ambitions and aspirations, they are also decrying the formation of a new platform, new forum, which is supposed to undermine China and Russia by simply excluding them. This quadrilateral forum has some of the leading economies of the world: Australia, Japan, US, and India. India is, see, remember the heading of the article was Delhi has to be calibrate its relationships with the world. So India is the focus, and the other members are Australia, Japan, and US. Putin and Xi also underlined their commitment to build a multipolar world. Now, when we say multipolar world, what it means is the concentration of economic power and military power and, let's say, cultural power that should not be rooted at one place. Right now, economic powerhouse is US, even military powerhouse is US. In terms of military might and resources available, America has the highest, is the highest country on that scale. But what Putin and Xi are publicly saying is we want a multipolar world. We don't want all the power to be concentrated in a single country. It should be distributed. And on the surface, this seems very, very valid. But when you dig deeper, what they mean by multipolar world is for the time being, we will claim multipolar world, but what we want is absolute superiority with us being in charge, which is fine. As in, I'm not saying it is fine as in it is acceptable. It is understandable. That is the route you have to take when you are negotiating. First, you will ask them to come down and then you can ascend. Okay. They reaffirmed their ambition to counter American hegemony. Hegemony means dominance. Let's say in SAARC nations, India has hegemony because India is the largest economy, India is the largest landmass, greatest military might in all these countries. So within the SAARC nations, India has hegemony. The American hegemony is more a world thing. They reaffirmed their ambition to counter American hegemony over the domain of international finance. Another domain where America has dominance or the greatest concentration of power is international finance. It is partly on account of the fact that the world's most stable currency is said to be dollar. It is the gold standard when it comes to exchanges. So I'm guessing that is where this is going. If America has been pressing China to limit its cooperation with Russia, the usually wooden Z thumbed his nose against Washington with a rare hug to Putin. Okay? The expectation is America would be asking China, or at least communicating to China, we don't want you to become very good. We don't want you to have cordial relationships with Russia. But then understand we live in a world where symbols mean great deal. Symbols mean a great deal. So let's say, especially when it comes to diplomatic issues, symbols mean a great deal. So if I'm meeting an international leader, let's say I'm the president of country of India, if I'm meeting an international leader and we simply stand next to each other, we don't even shake hands, there is a photo, it sends a different message. Shake hands, it sends a different message. If we hug, it sends a different message. Basically, the degree of cooperation, collaboration, interaction, all of that is down to the symbology that surrounds the meeting of these leaders. And the fact that America wanted China be a little circumspect, not engage in a high degree of collaboration with Russia, yet usually wouldn't Xi Jinping, the Chinese premier, yeah, premier, I'll call him premier. I don't know his official designation, I'll call him premier. So the Chinese premier, he is known for having a very wooden expression. By wooden expression, emotionless face. He does not really express his emotions publicly. But he sort of rebelled against America's instruction with a rare hug to put. You see, given that Xi Jinping is usually very, very emotionless and does not express emotion in public, and yet he ended up hugging Putin. That is a slap in the face for American aspirations or American instruction that don't get close with Russia. Okay. Now the context has been set. This is where, when I read the first word is Delhi, I understand this is where the Indian perspective and other things should come in. Delhi, like many Western chancelleries, had been betting on the thesis that Moscow and Beijing would not collaborate beyond a point. So India, like many Western chancelleries, so chancellor is also a head of state. Remember, back in the pre-independence days, we had a vice chancellor of India. So chancellors would be head of states. So Western head of states. When we talk of head of states, we are effectively talking of the Western countries itself. Delhi, like many Western countries, had been betting on the thesis, had been relying on the prediction, had been relying on the estimate that Moscow and Beijing, Russia and China, would not collaborate beyond a point. They would have some degree of collaboration, and that's fine, but they wouldn't become this. The level of collaboration would not become this comprehensive. In a corollary to this thesis, Delhi had been hoping that Putin will not ignore India's concerns in drawing too close to a China that has emerged as India's principal external challenge. In a corollary to this thesis, in line with this thesis, something that emanates from this original idea. The original idea being Moscow and China would not become very good collaborators. They would not extend their partnership beyond a certain point. Delhi was also hopeful, in line with this estimate, Delhi was also hopeful that Putin or Russia would be mindful of the fact that China has become India's biggest threat, biggest external threat, and therefore Russia would be circumspect in uh, extending or increasing the degree of collaboration with China. Okay, but that has not happened. The time has come for Delhi to re-examine its Russia thesis and its corollary. The time has come for India to re-evaluate what the assumptions were. And now, because those assumptions are turning out to be untrue, basically they have to think of a new strategy, they have to think of a new way of operation so that its own interests are safeguarded. Moscow today is more dependent than ever before on Beijing. Moscow today is more dependent than ever before on Beijing. The degree of collaboration between Moscow and Beijing is rising with passage of time, especially since Putin burned its bridges with the West in invading Ukraine. After the invasion of Ukraine, Russia and West do not have a cordial relationship, and therefore Putin is heavily dependent on its relationship with China. There is no doubt that China is the senior partner in the relationship with Russia. Okay. China is the senior partner, as in it is in the position of dominance in the relationship with Russia, because Russia is dependent on China. China is not really dependent on Russia, that is being implied. Delhi has strong reasons to worry that Putin's support for China's positions in the Indo-Pacific could undermine India's effort to build a multipolar Asia and magnify India's security vulnerabilities in relation to China. Okay. Basically, understand, Russia and China had a target of a multipolar world. India has a target of multipolar Asia. They want to become a significant player first in the Asian continent. And then the fact that Russia has had such great degree of collaboration and working with China that it will impede India's target of having a multipolar Asia where they are one of the leading powers, and also it will exacerbate or increase the vulnerabilities, India's security vulnerabilities in relation to China. This is in reference to the simple idea that China keeps on the expansionist attitude towards Taiwan is known, and also China has been for the longest time been expanding in Arunachal Pradesh and the northeastern part of the country. China has expansionist ambitions that those are our regions. So official country lines are different, but the country lines within which they operate, they are entirely different. India and China, in fact, they are different because China has expansionist ambitions of including some part of Arunachal Pradesh into China as of now. Okay, so that is the entirety of the article. Let's say if I wanted to get into what this article was about, what all ideas have been mentioned. This is basically how India should react to growing proximity between Russia and China. And Russia-China ties have especially improved since the invasion of Ukraine. Ever since Russia has burned its bridges or sacrificed its relationship with the Western countries, Russia has become even more dependent on China. In this relationship also, China is the superior partner. China is the superior partner. For the longest time, West believed that Russia and China they can have some degree of collaboration, but it would not extend beyond a point because they have competing regional priorities, regional prominence or supremacy. They will compete. Additionally, because they are so economically dependent on the West, they wouldn't go against the wishes of the West, or they wouldn't engage in a relationship that undermines the interests of the West. That was their expectation. Similarly, India had the expectation that Russia and China wouldn't collaborate. In emanating from this, there was an additional idea that given India's principal external threat is China, Putin or Russia would be mindful of the fact that China is not a friend. Uh, China and Russia, on the other hand, they have become better friends. They have started to collaborate more and more because their primary target is to get to a multipolar world and also challenge the supremacy and authority and dominance and hegemony of the West, especially United States. Especially United States. Especially United States. So, and they have their own individual expansionist targets. Russia wants to include Ukraine within its border. China wants to include Taiwan within its borders. At least that is what you mentioned. It's in the passage, not package. And that's it. I think that is all the ideas that I can think of that are comprehensively mentioned in this passage. Let us get to the statistical article analysis. The article was fairly short. It was only 370 words, 13 sentences, and the grade level reading it is 14.04, approximately 14. And this suggests that this is suitable for somebody who is in the first year of college, first year college level reading stuff. Now understand the words by themselves were not that difficult. It is simply the geopolitical realities that you have to be aware of that will lead you to be challenged in understanding this article entirely. But if you are preparing for CAT VRC, understand that CAT VRC, the questions will not be based on your external knowledge, it will be based on what is passage. So, if there is a question on this modus vivendi, even as he explored a modus vivendi with rest, I would perhaps run away from it because I did not have a way of identifying what modus vivendi meant if I'm attempting the passage. But then other things, usually wouldn't Z thumb his nose against Washington with a rare thing. What would be the meaning of the phrase thumb his nose? Rebelled, did not follow the instruction. Something along those lines. When we say like many Western chancelleries, what exactly are we referring to when we're talking Western chancelleries? Uh, what which of the following was an assumption that India made but the rest of the world did not make? Limited collaboration, or the Russia would be mindful of interests of the nations and therefore not collaborate with China too much. Options along those lines can be made. So if it was a passage, the external knowledge of geopolitical realities would not be required. But if it is only an article and you want to understand it entirely, then you would need to have the external geopolitical knowledge available. On the flash, reading E-score, this is 45.345, which means this is difficult to read. When we say difficult to read, we mean the kind of words used is slightly more advanced than what people. So, fairly good passage, fairly good in stuff. Hopefully, we learned something. That will be all for this week. For this episode. See you in the next one. Yeah.